Welcome to Expressions of Leadership, a podcast showcasing the many faces of leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry. From teachers to artists to C-suite leaders, we explore how people own their authentic leadership, celebrate their triumphs, overcome challenges, and share lessons learned. In today's show, we are speaking with attorney Debra Koven. Debra's estate planning practice focuses on helping families with minor children in the South Bay community and surrounding areas to keep their loved ones out of court and out of conflict. A UCLA graduate and Western State University of Law alumna, Debra initially built a successful litigation practice before transitioning to estate planning. She's a member of the American Academy of Estate Planning Attorneys and a licensed personal family lawyer. Beyond her legal career, Debra is a best-selling author, devoted mother, and passionate advocate for family protection. She balances her professional and personal life as a working mom, sports enthusiast, and reality TV fan. Debra, thank you for joining us on Expressions of Leadership. It's truly great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Michele. It's an honor to be here.
In your book, 100% Mortality, you write that you did not call the law called you. Can you tell me more about how you got into the legal profession?
It's a great question. I think, a lot of people have lawyers in their family, or maybe in this day and age, they're watching TV shows that bring out lawyers and that the profession looks like it might be attractive. But, I'm a bit older, and back in my day, there were no such things, right? There were no TV shows. There really wasn't a lot of women lawyers around, and I certainly didn't have any lawyers in my family. But there was something inside of me that just called to me that said, you're going to be a lawyer, literally at the age of 10. When most people are thinking about, whoa, they're going to be a veterinarian or an astronaut or whatever. I'm like, no, I'm going to be a lawyer. And I didn't even really know what that meant. And there's all kinds of, weird astrological signs and different things like that. The Chinese zodiac. There's a lot of different things that I eventually found out that led me potentially to that path. But there was just something inside of me that said, I need to be a lawyer. I'm going to be a lawyer. And so that's why I always say the law called me. I didn't call it, because there was never a doubt. There was never anything else in my life that I wanted to be. If you talk back to my family, much of whom have passed now, but if you talk to people who knew me back then, that's what I talked about, was being a lawyer, going to law school. And so that's why I always say the law called me. I did not call it.
That's pretty amazing that you just knew exactly what you wanted to do at such a young age.
Yeah, I guess, I would argue with people, and, I could talk, I wasn't afraid. I didn't have a lot of fear. So I guess that's kind of just was building my skills long before I even got into law school.
Now, when you got out of law school, you started out in civil litigation. What prompted the shift from civil litigation to estate law?
It's also a good question, because a lot of people do get into one type of law and they stick with that throughout their career. And I'll be honest, I loved litigation and I was good at it. I was a trial lawyer, so I was, generally speaking, in a world of mostly men. Um, but I had the skills. I could think on my feet. I could argue well. I was, of course, underestimated by a lot of the male counterparts because there just weren't a lot of women trial lawyers. But at the end of the day, after doing it for over 20 years, it took a toll. It took a toll on me in a lot of ways. Emotionally, there was a lot of stress involved with it. There was also a lot more competition as time went on. But the real impetus that got me out of the courtroom was the fact that I had a daughter coming into the world, and I wanted to be a mom. I wanted to not only have a job that I loved, but that I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom and be able to be in control of my calendar. And when you are working in the world of litigation, maybe a little more so now, but back then, before the internet became a thing, and before there was different types of appearances, meaning you didn't have to actually physically go to court every time. You could do it on the phone, you could do it via Zoom. Long before that, you were down at the courthouse and it was hours and hours. And as a trial lawyer, you could be spending, full days at the courthouse and then have to go back to your office for 8 to 10 hours to get ready for the next day on top of dealing with your other caseload. So it was a lot. And I wanted to be a mom. Honestly, that was the true reason why I knew I had to get out of the courtroom. And around that same time, my husband and I went and got our estate plan done because there was a child coming into the world. And we wanted to make sure that we were doing what we needed to do to protect her and our assets, of course. And so the lawyer that we went to said to me something to the effect of, well, this is really a great profession. You should consider doing it. And I thought, oh, yay, very exciting. Create some documents for people. And the thought of it really was not super exciting to me by any stretch of the imagination, because when you're a trial lawyer, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of adrenaline. There's a lot of new issues. There's always things to kind of keep your mind really moving. But, I started kind of looking into it a little bit. And the more I got into it and the more I recognized all the issues that most estate planning lawyers had with the way they were practicing, which was basically just document production. There was no relationships going on. There was no leadership and guidance being provided. It was basically documents. And I thought to myself, if I'm going to do this, it's not going to be in that traditional sense. And so I found a way, and again, it was through this group of personal family lawyers that you mentioned in my bio, to find a different way of practice to where I truly felt like I was making a difference for people. I was helping educate people. And I wasn't just creating a document. I was actually creating a relationship with a client and providing them with guidance that they really needed to help protect their family at the end of life. So that's kind of the roundabout way of saying that's what happened. But the nuts and bolts of it is that I was becoming a mom and I needed to get out of the courtroom, but I had to still keep working. And I wanted to still be a lawyer and I still wanted to help people. So that's kind of how it came about. And the deeper I got into it, the more I found I really loved it and was able to create a niche market for myself that I could wake up every day and be excited about doing what I do.
And it sounds like the connection that you had with clients in civil litigation is something that you thrived off of and that you ended up carrying over into your family estate planning practice.
Absolutely. I think that, when I was doing civil litigation initially, working for other lawyers, it wasn't so great, right? Because you're kind of the grunt, you're at the low end of the totem pole. I won't even talk about, at that point in time, there was zero protection for women in the workplace. It wasn't a pleasant time. So I fairly quickly left the firm mentality and went out on my own. So I was tasked with everything, with every aspect of the job, including taking on cases. And so I started with the relational type lawyering back then. I was taking cases that mattered to me, not just whatever walked in the door. And sometimes there were really hard cases and people who had been turned away by other lawyers because the issues were complex. And, there was a lot of bad stuff going on, let's just say, in the personal injury world back in the 90s. Ambulance chasing and a lot of, unethical practice. And that's just not who I was. So I took cases where the people actually mattered to me. And I felt that I was a better lawyer when I was representing people that I liked and that I believed in, as opposed to just whatever walked in the door. So I think it started way back then. And I found that connecting with my clients made me a better lawyer. So when I started doing estate planning and thinking it from the perspective of just doing this document production, it didn't make sense to me. But creating these different types of scenarios with clients where I'm actually getting to know who they are, they're getting to know who I am. Because let's face it, anytime you're hiring a professional, there is an element of trust that you're walking in the door with, right? You have to say, oh, I'm trusting that this person is looking out for my best interest.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get to that place of trust? And you get to that place of trust when your clients know who you are, when they understand your why, what you're doing, and then they feel that sense of this person really is looking out for my best interest.
So, as someone who has built a long career in civil litigation and estate law, how would you describe your leadership philosophy?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And honestly, when you're in knee deep in it, I don't know that you're necessarily thinking about it from that perspective. And I think that in some ways there's differences between people who are experts in their field and people who are leaders in their field. Um, I wrote a book. Obviously, you have it up there on the screen. I think to some degree, people see me having written a book on the subject as maybe being an expert in that field. But leadership is different, really. I think leadership is more about, I think expertise is, you have substantial skills and you have experience and you have knowledge. And yes, I have those things, right? But a leader is more focused on the guidance portion of it, maybe influence, inspiration on behalf of others, whereas expertise is more about yourself. And so my leadership, if you want to call it that, has always been about a collective as opposed to an individual, if that makes sense. So focusing on the greater goal beyond just me, but rather trying to help the greater good of the people around me. So from my perspective, like I do a lot of free webinars, not so much webinars anymore, but in-person presentations where I'm trying to educate people because I am just one lawyer. I can't help everyone, but I believe that everyone needs some form of estate planning. So how do I go about helping the greater surroundings, the greater community around me? And that's by educating. So I guess to some degree, I see myself as a leader because I do get out there and I am wanting to help people really understand why they need these things, why they need to have an estate plan, how it's going to protect their family, right? Without necessarily saying, oh, but you have to come to me because I'm the expert in the area. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the way I guess I approach it is how can I get the word out to as many people as possible so that they understand the importance of all this, as opposed to just saying, listen to me because I know what I'm talking about. I'm the expert. It's kind of a combination. And there's nothing wrong with being both. I think it's perfectly fine to both be an expert and a leader. But my mindset and who I am as a person is much more about being the guider as opposed to look at me, I'm the expert, I'm the one who knows.
Yes, and leading is about guiding. This is your way of guiding people, whether or not they're your clients. And your value of education and being of service really comes out in the way that you show up for your community and also for others.
I hope so. I mean, that's kind of my goal. Like I said, I'm only one lawyer, and I can only take so many clients per month, and in my career. But again, this is something that really everyone needs.
What are some of the other values that underpin your leadership?
First of all, I think it's really important that I am who I am, right? I don't put on an act when I'm sitting with people. I can be snarky and I can be sarcastic. I try to keep things light because let's face it, talking about death and incapacity is not exactly a fun topic for most people.
Mhm.
I always kind of have considered myself a closet comedian. I like to make people laugh. So I try to bring the levity in addition to, the guidance. And I really do focus on people's understanding as to what the consequences of actions are going to be. And I tell my clients, I don't want you to make a decision until you fully understand what you're doing. So that's a really important part of it to me is even if people don't wind up working with me for whatever reason, maybe they don't like my style, maybe they don't like, my comedy, maybe they think I'm too expensive. But as long as they are getting something out of that initial meeting, as long as they're understanding what estate planning is really all about and how it works, then I feel like I've done my job, right? Of course, we all need to make a living. I need to have clients, but ultimately my goal is really for people to get it, because you can see it when you're sitting in the room and I'm explaining things and I diagram things out, I draw things out on a whiteboard. People get it and the light kind of goes on. And then I feel like, okay, great. I hope I can help you do the tasks that need to be done. But as long as you have an understanding, that I feel like my job has kind of been done.
Now, you also write about the impact of role models in your book, both good and bad. Role modeling is an essential leadership skill, as you then set the example of what you expect from other people. How have mentors or role models influenced your leadership style?
It's funny that you asked that, because um, I've always been a person who has learned by watching others do things, right? Like I learned how to drive a stick shift car, for example, because I had a boyfriend way back in the day who had a stick shift car and I didn't know how to drive one, but I watched him so intently that I understood the mechanics of what it is that he was doing, so that when I actually had to sit in the car and do it myself, I really got it. I really understood, what it was that I needed to do to make that car move forward. So I've always kind of been of the mindset that it's a good idea to watch other people who are doing what you want to do in order to learn how to do it. So, for example, in my own office, and again, going back to even the litigation days, I would take in interns, people who were kids who were in college, maybe where they were studying to be lawyers, maybe not, but they would take them in and say, okay, let's teach you how to do all these different jobs. Why? Because part of when you work in a firm, you need to be indispensable. There's always going to be another person behind you who wants to take your place. But if you know how to do all these different things within the office, you're going to become a more valued employee. So I would role model by saying, watch what I'm doing so you can learn how to do these things, because that's how I learned. Right. And I think it's really important that you not just talk the talk, but that you walk the walk. And that to me is how role modeling has kind of become part of my life. You also learn what not to do, right? I think we all learn good and bad lessons from our families and from growing up. Hopefully, your parents were great role models for you, but sometimes they're not. So sometimes you're learning what not to do or how to do something different than the way somebody else did it. That's all part of the modeling that I think is important. Like with my daughter, right? I often will say things to her like, "Hey, this is what I did when I was growing up." And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. And you need to certainly experience things on your own, but it's also good to learn lessons from people who are older than you, who are wiser than you, and who have more experience than you do. And so, that's kind of how I did it too, including in my litigation career, right? I didn't just jump out the gate and start trying cases. I had mentors, people I would go to court with and watch what they did and see how they maybe would talk to the jury or approach the judge or deal with witnesses. And I learned how to do those things from watching other people who I trusted, who I respected, who I felt had integrity, and who handled things the way I wanted to handle. And so that's kind of what I try to do. I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm perfect at it. I'm certainly not 100% successful, but my goal is always to have people see what I do, not necessarily just what I say.
We've got a great discussion ahead, but first we're going to take a quick break, so don't go anywhere. We'd love for you to be a part of the Expressions of Leadership community. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts and connect with us on Instagram and YouTube at Expressions of Leadership. We are back on Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry. We are speaking with special guest, Debra Koven. What leadership strategies do you use to educate and empower clients rather than just advising them?
Yeah. Again, I don't know that when I'm sitting there, I'm thinking about it from that perspective, but I try to give examples oftentimes or tell stories. I think that those are two really important ways to show guidance. And I always try to use like either my experiences or experiences that my clients have had. I mean, that was kind of the whole thing about the book. When I thought about writing, well, first of all, I never really thought about writing a book until I thought about writing a book. And I thought to myself, well, how do I actually illustrate to people how important it is to get their estate plan done? And I started thinking about a lot of the different clients that I had, the experiences that I had. And even when I'm sitting in, a session with a client, I'm always giving stories about to exemplify different situations that can happen. And I use myself as often as I can. So I think that providing guidance by showing mistakes that were made or excuses that came up or misunderstandings is a really good way to show guidance so that, hey, this is what can happen. And here's a real life example of it.
Hmm.
And the stories are endless. Obviously, I chose 15 of them for my book, but there's so many more. In fact, somebody suggested I write a second book, updating some of these clients, which I'll think about doing at some point in time. But just because things do happen all the time, and every client presents with new issues, but there's almost always something that I can draw upon from my experience. Again, I've been a practicing lawyer for over 34 years. So I've had a lot of different experiences. I've met a lot of different people. And so providing the stories that I've come across or that I've experienced along the way, to me, is a good way to provide that guidance.
Hmm.
Because again, like you said, you're leading number one by example, right? So you're walking the walk and you're talking the talk, but you're also giving exemplaries of what it is that you want people to understand. And it's just like when you're doing a math problem, you can see a formula on a board and you can plug in numbers. But if you don't really understand the nuts and bolts of that formula, you're not really going to be able to explain it to someone else.
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
So that's kind of the way I look at it. But I really have a good understanding because I've experienced a lot of these things. So rather than me just saying, hey, you should choose this person in a certain role, let me talk to you about why this is the kind of person you might want to think about and give
Hmm.
examples as to that. A
Hmm.
lot of people say, oh, I want to choose my parents. Well, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your parents are likely not going to outlive you. So
Hmm.
while you may trust them and they may be in your mind a good person for right now, you're not planning to die right now. So
Hmm.
maybe we ought to think about something a little longer term.
That storytelling is vital because it helps people to see the whole picture. Sometimes, if you're explaining a concept, especially a legal one, it can be hard to understand what that means in real life. But the stories help to bring it home when they can see how certain decisions impacted someone else.
Exactly. And I think it's not just applicable in the law, right? It's applicable in so many different genres, so many different professions. Whether it's marketing or advertising or whatever it is, finance, there's always going to be a better way to tell a story that will shine the light on someone who really doesn't have the slightest idea what you're talking about until they
Mhm.
can maybe internalize it, personalize it, see themselves in that position. That really is what brings it home, in my opinion.
And can you give an example of a story you used recently with a client?
Sure. There's so many. Let's see. I often tell this story because a lot of my clients, while most of my clients do have young children, I do have clients that have kids who are heading off to college. And most people, they want to think of their baby as their baby, even though at 18 they become an adult. So I often tell the story of clients that I have that had triplets, which is crazy. The thought of that is mind-boggling. So there are these three kids that are heading off to college right before the pandemic. Okay. And they were in the same state, but they were in a different city, hundreds of miles away. And I told my clients, I'm like, before your kids go off to college, we need to get documentation in place for them. They need to have a HIPAA waiver, a healthcare directive, a power of attorney. Why? Because they're adults. And although you're still their parents, you're no longer their guardians under the law.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wound up creating those documents for those three kids who were heading off to college in a different city. And then the pandemic hit and unfortunately, one of the kids had a psychotic break. He was bipolar, was undiagnosed, oftentimes doesn't get diagnosed until, 18, 19, 20. And the parents, thank goodness, had those documents in place. So they were able to travel to the city where he was, which again was not local, but still within the same state, had those documents in hand so they could get him admitted into a hospital because he wasn't capable of making his own decisions.
Mm-hmm.
They could go to the college and say, we need to put a pause on this because he's unable to participate right now. There were things that they would have ultimately been able to do, but most likely they would have had to go to court and get a court order in order to be the guardian of their then 19-year-old child.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me is a story that exemplifies when your child becomes 18, as much as you still feel they're your baby, legally, they are not.
Mm-hmm.
And you must have those documentation, those documents in place, which again, this is why I say that everyone needs some form of estate planning, but most people aren't thinking in those terms.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's always a story that I like to tell to my clients who have a bit older children,
Mm-hmm.
because it's scary stuff that happens. And when you're in crisis mode, right, the last thing that you want to deal with is time, right? Taking the time to go find a lawyer, taking the time to get to court, taking the time to get those emergency orders. Because even though emergency orders like that can get taken care of fairly quickly, it's still going to take hours.
Mm-hmm.
In an emergency situation, you might not have hours.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, unfortunately, do their estate planning when they're in crisis mode, which is the worst time to do it. It's the scariest time to do it. It's the
Mm-hmm.
most pressure time to do it. So that's kind of, an example that I give in terms of that scenario. But there's so many, that's what my whole book is about, right? You've got the different clients who have made mistakes over the course of time and how they tried to go about doing this, or they had some excuse as to why they hadn't gotten it done. Right? That's always the best one. Oh, I'm young. I'm not sick. But again, you don't want to wait until you're in crisis mode to have to do this. I have done deathbed planning, and it is so stressful, and it's so difficult, and it's so emotional. And that's just not the way people want to live their lives.
And thinking of those difficult moments, what role does empathy play in your leadership when you are helping clients to make decisions during those times?
It's kind of a double-edged sword when you're a lawyer, right? Because you have to try to stay objective, but I care about my clients and I want them to make the best decisions. And sometimes people just don't make smart decisions. Unfortunately, all we can do is provide guidance. We can't make decisions for people. So there's a balance there between trying to be the tough guy and saying, hey, you really should think about these things. But at the same time, I understand how hard this is. And not everyone has, the ideal situation. Not everyone has family they can lean on. Not everyone has, siblings or cousins or someone that they feel they can trust. And I have to give them permission. I have to say, it's okay to not choose a family member. If your best friend would fill this role well, then that's who you should choose, right? It is a balance between being empathetic and understanding what people are going through. A really good example of that is my story called Apathetic Andy. And that's one of the chapters in my book. And he was this older gentleman who kind of just said, in all honesty, what do I care? I'm going to be dead. And I thought to myself, wow, really? All this hard-earned money that you've earned and you have these kids. And that was kind of his defense mechanism. Is to
Hmm.
say, what do I care? I'm going to be dead. Of course you care. You've been taking care of your family for how many, you know, decades. Of course you care. But he really didn't know that there were solutions to the things that he was facing in his family. And so that was kind of the attitude. So on one hand, I was very empathetic to the thought that he really didn't understand that there were solutions to all this. But at the same time, it was kind of like, what are you talking about? Of course you care. You love your family. You want to protect them. You want to take care of them. And I don't know, that's a balance because you can't
Hmm.
just, oh, woe is me and give into that. I have to be, right? I have to provide that authority. I have to provide that guidance. I have to provide that leadership in that moment to say, hey, I know you really care. And this is just your way of dealing with the fact that you don't know how to deal with it. So let me
Hmm.
show you what we can do. This apathetic Andy's had an adult alcoholic son, and he also had a daughter an adult daughter who, was the perfect child, if you will. And his thought was, well, I'll just give it, half and half to each of the kids. What do I care? They'll deal with it. And I said, wait a minute. You want to take care of your son, but at the same time, you don't want your daughter to bear the burden of having to deal with her alcoholic brother, right? So if you just give half the money to the alcoholic son, when he blows through it, where do you think he's going to go when you've died? He's going to his
Hmm.
sister. Do you want to put that burden on her? There's a solution so that that doesn't happen, right? And as soon as he kind of understood how we could work through this in estate planning, it changed his whole attitude. He suddenly
Hmm.
was very not in that mindset of I don't care because I'll be dead. That's kind of why I wrote the book, so that people could find themselves within these characters. And really, when I say characters, these were real clients. I changed names and scenarios, of course, to protect them. But I think everyone can find a chapter in that book that they can relate to.
Through these anecdotes, you're looking to prevent people from making truly consequential mistakes. And of course, as humans, we're all bound to make mistakes. So, how do you handle mistakes or setbacks as a leader?
You really have to be humble. And humble is not always an easy emotion to wear. But we've all done it, right? I've had situations where something went wrong, and all you can do is the best that you can with the skills that you have and the knowledge that you have and the experience that you have to try to make it right. It doesn't always happen, right? I mean, I've been fairly fortunate in my career that I haven't been sued, and I have, like, I haven't done um, a lot of egregious things, thankfully. But when mistakes happen, you do your best to say, hey, we blew it here, and I'm really sorry. It was never my intent to make this error, right? Let me fix it. Let me see if I can fix it for you. I have a lot of colleagues who have had those kinds of situations that we try to talk through them. How can we best approach this? Um, I mean, personally, I've, back in my litigation days, it was always a little more scary, right? To make mistakes because it could certainly wind up costing a case, and you never want to do that. So I've been fairly fortunate. Now, granted, sometimes you lose cases. I didn't lose a lot, but I lost cases. And I would always try to postmortem them and look at it, right? And see what it is. And when I was doing litigation, the first place you go is to talk to the jury. And if they'll talk to you, and they won't always, but I would always go to the jury on the cases where I lost and say, what did we do? Where did it go wrong? What happened? And sometimes it's a witness, sometimes it's a fact, sometimes they hang their hat on something you never in a million years would have thought they would hang their hat on. And then
Hmm.
you have to go to the client and say, look, this is what happened, and I'm really sorry. I did the best I could. I thought this was the winning strategy, but it didn't turn out to be the winning strategy. And I
Hmm.
think that when you are earnestly doing your best and people see that, the mistakes are forgivable even if they have negative consequences. I've been very fortunate, but also smart in a way, because I have always given things my all. I'm not a, you know, I don't go into things trying to semi do it, right? Do my best to do my best with everything that I do. And when you
Hmm.
come across that way, I think people see that. And so when there's an error, when there's a mistake, you don't necessarily feel any better about it, but people will give you that, that sincere understanding and forgiveness, so that you can move forward and learn from the mistake that you made, or whatever it was that happened that didn't go the way you expected, and you carry on, and you're a better person for it,
Yeah.
and a better lawyer, hopefully, too.
And a better leader when you're willing to be vulnerable and authentic. We all make mistakes or take a wrong turn and things don't turn out the way we were hoping. And when we're able to admit that and have an honest conversation with people, they're much more willing to handle that with grace.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right.
Well, every great leader knows the value of a pause. So we are going to take one now. We'll be right back after a short break. By partnering with Expressions of Leadership, you'll reach an audience of professionals passionate about leadership and growth. For sponsorship opportunities, please contact us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com. We are back on Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry. We are speaking with special guest, Debra Koven. Debra, how did writing 100% Mortality challenge or change you as a leader?
Boy, it was a challenge to write. I mean, a challenge in a good way. The stories themselves were actually fairly easy to write, because they're real stories, and the message in them, I think, was pretty easy. Believe it or not, the hardest part of writing that book was the introduction and the conclusion. Um, but I had a real sense, for me, I had a real sense of pride when I completed that book. Like, I really felt proud of myself for doing it. So I never in a million years thought I would write a book. And I know other people, I know other authors, I know the work that goes into it. And I just thought, well, I don't know if this is really for me. But I'm a goal setting kind of person. My whole life, my whole career has been around setting different goals and trying to accomplish those goals. And when I accomplish a goal, I want to set a new goal, because I don't want to be bored in what I do. Like I said, I love what I do, but it can't, there's an element of it that can be kind of hamster on a wheel, right? You don't want
Sure.
to ever get into that mindset. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna try writing this book, because one of the stories kind of just came to me. Clueless Cody just kind of came to me in a flash, and I started writing it. And then, of course, I had to find a publisher, and I wrote it. It's not a ghostwriter; it's me. So at the end of the day, and it took probably a good 8 or 9 months to get it all written and together and all that. And I mean, I felt a sense of pride that I
Mhm.
accomplished this goal, because this was one of those things. And then it, went to international bestseller. It was one of those things that I never thought in a million years that I would do, and that I put in the work. I made the sacrifices in time, and I just really persevered through it, because there are times, you get stuck, you get into a place where you're in a rut, or you don't feel like it, or whatever the case may be. And I was really very proud. I mean, I'm always proud of my accomplishments, but this was one where I really felt that sense of pride. And how it changed me as a leader, I don't know that it did, because it really is the essence of who I am, right? It is the storytelling, it is the guidance. I read a lot of different estate planning books before I actually wrote mine. And so many of them were kind of the how to guide, right? And they were
Mhm.
dry, and they were boring, and they were bullet points. And this is just not what I want to do. This is not what I want to accomplish. Um, so there was a part of it that was really, this is me on a plate. And that was one of the things that my publisher felt too. Like, they felt like this really showed who I was. as a lawyer, as a person. And so that it gave me a great sense of pride. And so I use it more as a tool to yes, of course, I want to be the leader, but this is where I show my expertise. This is where I show what I know, what I'm talking about, and the experiences that I've had and how I've been able to guide clients in the right direction. Most of them, not all of them are success stories, obviously, in the book. But that's kind of how I feel about it.
So the book is also a reflection of you and who you are as a leader and a professional.
I hope so. I hope it is. I feel like it is.
As a leader in your field, what do you hope 100% mortality contributes to public conversations about estate planning?
Wow, that's a good question. It's odd because when I was a personal injury lawyer, which is what I was, a litigator, everybody knows somebody who's a litigator or a personal injury lawyer. You see them advertising all over the place. They're on buses, they're on billboards. So everyone kind of knows somebody who does personal injury, but not everybody needs a personal injury lawyer. Everybody over the age of 18 needs some form of estate planning. And it's a really hard message to sell to people. So my hope is that by writing this book, people will find themselves in one of these avatars and say, hey, this makes sense. I need to get this done.
What keeps you passionate about your work after so many years in the profession?
Well, like I said, I got into the law because the law called me. And I've always been the kind of lawyer who wanted to help people. I could have gone into corporate law. I could have done, I could have stayed in insurance defense. There's a lot of areas where you can probably make a lot more money and have a lot more financial success than the areas that I've undertaken. But my passion has been in the people that I serve and helping the people that I serve and educating the people that I serve. And so that's kind of what keeps me. I am a passionate person. I'm passionate about whether it's sitting and watching a UCLA basketball game or if it's sitting at the beach and watching the waves. I'm very passionate about the things that I do. And my work has to be something that I'm passionate about. I couldn't do it as long as I've done it or as much as I've done it if I didn't feel that drive to continue helping people and pursuing the education and guidance of people that are around me. That has always been extremely important to me. And that's why when I broke off on my own in litigation, I would take those hard cases. Why? Because I'm passionate about what I do, which is helping people. And so when people were turned down by other lawyers because, oh, it's too hard an issue, I'm like, bring it on. Let me see if I can help you. And again, even when if you don't win, if you're not successful, people feel seen and they feel heard. And that is extremely important to me, to make sure that my clients really know that I care and that they do have a voice and that they have a story and it's important and it should be told. So that's kind of why I feel the way I do. But I think in general, a passionate person, and I bring it. I bring the experience, I bring the wisdom, I bring the passion, and hopefully it makes me a better lawyer.
And I'm sure your clients can sense that passion and dedication, which gives them the assurance that you will deliver the highest quality service.
I hope so. That is absolutely the goal.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll find out what's next for Debra. Stay with us.
True transformation starts from within. The Forward Project partners with organizations to create meaningful culture shifts and develop leaders who inspire real change. If your team is ready to move forward with purpose, visit www.theforwardproject.co. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. We're joined today by estate planning attorney and best-selling author Debra Koven. Debra, what's next for you?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I'm a busy lawyer. I always have clients in the pipeline, and I'm still doing live presentations, trying to educate my community. Um, Again, a couple people have suggested I write another book. Don't know that I'm there yet. Um, but I think I need to get through this year and contemplate the new goals. So maybe by the end of the year, I'll think about writing another book. I've also thought about taking on more of a specialty area. Um, Special needs planning is something that I've been thinking about doing because I think it's a really important and underserved community, especially in this day and age when so many things are potentially in jeopardy for children. Um, you know, I don't want to get political here, but certainly there could be changes in the board, in the Department of Education and how services are delivered to kids that need it. So that's a kind of an important issue in my mind. So it's something I'm contemplating.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to keep doing what I do. I love what I do. And as long as I love what I do, I'm going to keep doing it. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll be here to service clients and to help people and hopefully to educate. And, again, if it's writing another book, great. But it might not be. I just don't know at this point. I'm certainly not in the building phase of my career. I've been practicing for over 34 years. I'm probably more in the maybe not quite the twilight phase, but I like to call it the coasting phase. Like I'm not trying to build my practice. I'm good with where I'm at in terms of how many clients I take every month. So, I'm just going to keep doing what I do as long as I love what I do.
What legacy do you hope to leave as a leader in estate planning and beyond?
That is such a big question. Um, look, I don't think one really winds up knowing their legacy because the legacy comes after them.
Mm-hmm.
But I hope that people see me as someone who was passionate about what they did, who tried really hard to help people. That wasn't just all about earning bucks, earning money, but that who made a difference in people's lives because they spared people from having to go through a mess. Keeping their family out of court is a big deal. Like I said, I was a litigator for 20 plus years. Very few people want to go to court. There's a few, but most people want to stay out of court. And what many people don't understand is that when you don't have an estate plan put together, that's where your family winds up. They wind up in a court situation. And that's just unnecessary. It's voluntary. Don't volunteer your family for it. So I hope that my legacy is that people could see that I'm passionate about what I do, that I taught a lot of people about what they could do to avoid putting their family in that situation, and that I helped a lot of people. That's
Mm-hmm.
really hopefully what my legacy will be. And of course, as a mom, it's my number one job. I always say that. I have a beautiful daughter, and she is the reason why I do everything. I want to make her a better life than the life that I had. I think that's what most people want for their kids is to give their children a better life than what they had, and whatever that means. Maybe it's financially, maybe it's emotionally, maybe it's something else. But I guess at the end of the day, she's the most important person. And so I want her to remember me as somebody who loved her to the moon and back and who would do anything for her and who supported her at every single turn.
As the wise authors Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner have written, the legacy you leave is the life you lead. Whether it's what you do with the clients that you serve, or how you support your child, or how you show up in your authentic and passionate way with those around you.
It's beautiful. I love that. Thank you for that.
Well, now we've reached the point in our show where we ask the guest one advice question and one fun question. Starting with the advice question, if you were a teacher for a day, what life lesson would you focus on?
The important thing that I would really want to teach people is how to have that work-life balance and to have it earlier in your life rather than later. It took me many, many years to get to the place where I had it. And it's really being in control of your calendar. It's being able to schedule things in a way so that whether it's your personal or your business, that you're making time for the things that are important. Maybe that's taking your kid to the doctor or going to their rehearsal or going to their sporting event. But I think it's so, or for traveling or whatever. I mean, and I write this in my book. I was a lawyer because I wanted to help people and to work. So I didn't do things like take vacations, right? I focused on just the work. And there's good and bad with that. Of course, you have to find the balance. You want to work your way up the corporate ladder. There's certain things that you have to do. But I think it's so important to understand that at the end of the day, a lot of people say this, when you're on your deathbed, you're not thinking, oh, I worked a few more hours. And putting that into life, into your practice earlier, rather than waiting until you're in your 50s, 60s to think about it from that perspective, I think would make people a lot happier and have a lot more balanced life. I think you can find a way to get there by starting at the end, figuring out where you want to be every month, whether that's financially, emotionally, family-wise, and working backwards to how do I get there, right? A lot of people think forward. Oh, I want to make a lot of money. Okay, that's great. What do you want to make in terms of your monthly net? What do you want to have at the end of the day? What do you want to spend that on? Then you figure out how to get there. So for me, it was a matter of figuring out how much money do I need every month? How many clients is it going to take at what fee range to get there? And once I did that, I had that goal in mind to reach. It's this number of clients per month. Then you go out and get that. And then so when you know what those goals are at the end of the day, you can find that balance because you know exactly how much you have to do to get to that goal. Maybe it's not money. Maybe it's, how many children you want to have or where you want to travel to. You have to see it and then work backwards to how to get there.
Begin with the end in mind.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's my belief. So that is a big part of work-life balance, is really understanding and knowing what you want, who you want it with, how you're going to get there, as opposed to just, oh, I want to be a millionaire. Okay, well, if you want to be a millionaire, how are you going to get there?
Well, speaking of $1 million, let's move to the fun question. If you won $1 million, what's the first thing you do?
It's ridiculous in a way. But you know what? I have a car that's 12 years old. I've been driving the same car for over 12 years and I love it. It's a great car, but it's starting to break down. So I think the first thing I would do is actually buy myself a car. I mean, I haven't had a new car in, like I said, over 12 years. And the car I bought was because, I had a little kid. So I needed an SUV. I needed something to drag all of her stuff around in. So I think the first thing I would do is buy myself a car. And then I have a lot of charities that I support. I'm very big on animals, and Best Friends Animal Society has always been one of my charities of choice. I think I would actually like to take a trip there with my daughter and my husband to there in Utah and actually visit and be able to donate not just money, but time to helping out some of the animals that they have on their farm. And of course, I put away a chunk for my kids' college, I'm sure. And I don't know. After that, I'm not sure. Maybe take a trip.
Debra, thank you so much for joining us on Expressions of Leadership. It was truly a pleasure to have you. Your passion and wisdom and dedication to helping families navigate some of life's most important decisions really came through in our conversation. And we're so grateful that you shared your insights, not just as an attorney, but as a parent and a person deeply committed to leaving a meaningful legacy.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
And thank you to the audience. We appreciate you listening.
If you haven't done so already, make sure to click on that follow button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Have a guest you'd like us to interview? Questions, ideas, or just want to say hello, you can reach us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com or connect with us on Instagram or YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, thanks to our amazing team behind the scenes for making this podcast possible, including our sound engineer, Graham Palmer, and my chief encourager and advisor, Jeremiah Higgins. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and we'll see you soon. Take care.